All right, welcome back. We're looking at Qwen 3.827b once again. We are doing some benchmarking in terms of a reasoning effort, and that's it. We are sticking with a single model today. So we're doing the Q4 variant unslot, and we're only adjusting one parameter, the low, medium, and extra high reasoning effort across the board, and seeing how that impacts a few things. Total time to completion. We're looking at tokens per second, if there's any impact there, which shouldn't be. There should be very little variability there. And then also really seeing the output of the quality of the benchmarks in terms of like pass or fail. So it's going to be a pretty long video, just like yesterday's video. I'm going to try to speed run through the numbers. And then for those that want to see the benchmarks themselves, they'll be towards the end of the video. So yeah, so let's go ahead and jump into the actual results here. So first off, I want to thank everyone who left some comments on yesterday's video in terms of how to improve some of these benchmarks, some transparency needs, as well as hosting the benchmarks themselves on GitHub. I'll work on those in future videos and get those out to you so you can run them on your own hardware as well. Ground rules, I mentioned before, we're doing this specific AI model, and I have that linked in the description if you want to take a look. I can't run the MVP, what is it called? It's called NVFP4 version because I do not own an NVIDIA Blackwell GPU. I am running this on my GMK Evo X2. It's a mini PC, Ryzen strict Halo, has 128 gigabytes of shared memory. Some of you were saying I was getting pretty bad numbers, and I agree. This is not the platform for maximization and token records by any means. Compared to even like 2080s, 3090s, things like that, tokens per second are definitely going to be overall slower. I don't have the money to build a dedicated AI rig with powerful GPUs, especially with all these prices going up. Maybe one day, but for now, this is my daily driver PC that I run both my day-to-day personal life on, as well as all these AI benchmarks, and I do some light gaming on this computer. I was lucky enough to buy this months ago before the price shot up like crazy. So just kind of a little side tangent here. I don't think this is the optimal build for most people. Making that decision of spending 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000, depending on what chip you use, either DJ Spark or one of these new AMD ones that are running these chips. I think that's a personal decision, and I don't think for most people it makes sense to spend all that money for this unified system build if they're not going to be doing these kind of benchmarkings or this type of work. It's pretty ridiculous how crazy these prices are going up, and a lot of you commented that this is kind of a reason why you shouldn't buy one, because these numbers are low. I would argue that it depends on price and personal decision. If this is something that interests you and something that you want to get into, this kind of architecture and these kind of systems, like even like Macs with high unified memory, do make sense for those individuals. I think a blanket statement saying that it does not work for everyone is false for the most part. But yeah, maybe we'll get there one day and we'll be able to build a sick AI build, dedicated Linux box with some beefy GPUs. But for now, this is what I got, and this is what I'm currently running. And this is all me learning and documenting what I learned as I go. Not an AI engineer. I don't have any formal schooling, so this is me learning and sharing what I learned. So yeah, now that that's out of the way, let's look at the numbers. Sorry for a little tangent there. So we talked about the model. Let's talk about the parameters. Yesterday's model was enabled thinking false. Some of you were asking how that is being ran or how that's even possible. In onslaught documentation, it has a none flag. However, note that that none flag does not do anything if you run it through like the CLI tool. This is not an actual flag. In the actual desktop version, there is a toggle for none. And when I did my testing, none in this mode does actually disable thinking. So this was a prompt that I just gave it, and there was no thinking involved. When I turned on low, you see that thinking was enabled. So none does work here when you run benchmarks and you run things kind of through Python scripts, things like that. You cannot pass none. You have to specifically enable this parameter that is found on their settings here. Let me find that for you. If you look at the official model card itself, if you scroll down to, let's look at Qwen's actually. It's on Qwen's documentation. I think it's here. And then if we scroll down, you'll see an OpenAI example. You'll see this specific parameter and then enable thinking true. I went ahead and turned that false, and that's how I was able to disable. I wasn't able to just pass it none. If you look at the actual gguf file and extract the word none, does not actually work, whereas like extra high, that does work, low, that does work, and then medium, that does work. None does not work in terms of passing that parameter around. So there's a thing to note if you're going to be running some benchmarks on your own. Fun little thing that I ran into. All right, in terms of what Qwen describes each one for, instruct off being direct response, no thinking, low, efficient reasoning, optimization for speed and cost, medium, balance, accuracy, and speed, and then extra high for complex tasks demanding thorough analysis. So yeah, pretty self-explanatory. In terms of total time spent, 24 minutes on no thinking enabled, 29 on low, medium 21, which is a nice little surprise that medium was actually quicker than low, and then extra high 156 minutes. So obviously a good chunk of thinking contributed to this, and we'll look specifically at the breakdowns in some of the benchmarks below to see where those tokens were being generated and how they were spent on thinking versus actual output. If we look at input tokens per prompt, we should see a consistent number across the board, and I was very curious on why it wasn't the case, and I did some research. So it turns out that this style that we're turning in terms of thinking and reasoning is actually a preamble that gets injected into the benchmark itself. So on extra high, it injects reasoning effort is set to extra high. Please think carefully through the tasks, validate key assumptions, consider plausible alternatives, and prioritize correctness, consistency, and clarity in the final answer. Low injects reasoning effort set to low. Keep your thinking brief and focus, moving directly to the conclusion without unnecessary elaboration. And oddly enough, medium injects nothing at all. So we saw a very interesting result here when we did the Tetris clone, and I'll share with that here shortly. And just to confirm, I took some text from the GUF file, and you can see here that on medium, there isn't any reasoning instructions, whereas extra high has this and low has this. So just confirm I wasn't going crazy. And indeed, medium did not get any preamble being injected. All right. Had it explained to me like I'm 5 on how this toggle works, and it provided pretty good details. And this is what I talked about earlier about there being no none variable whenever I pass it through the prompts. I did this as a sanity check just to make sure I wasn't going crazy. You have to set either low, medium, or extra high, or actually high. There's actually, if you set high, it does pass through extra high automatically. So that's kind of nice that high and extra high kind of do the same thing. In terms of simplification for like harnesses and things like that. So that's a good little finding there. And again, none doesn't do anything if you pass that variable through. You kind of have to specifically toggle enable thinking false to turn that off. You can't pass none, at least not now. Who knows if there's updates in the future for that. But as of right now, I think some of the documentation does not provide that correct detail, at least not easy to read. All right. Let's take a look at the actual benchmarks themselves. So the Tetris clone, here's the prompt. Like I said, I'll work on getting this hosted on GitHub so that if you're interested in getting that downloaded and ran on your own builds, that'll be available. Essentially, the Tetris clone, single HTML file, and one-shot output only. So we saw this yesterday. This is with no thinking turned on. We saw that it was essentially broken. It seemed like it was working, but we can't really tell, and there's no shapes being rendered. So this would be kind of a fail. If you look at low, this is our first kind of glimpse into reasoning turned on. And right away, we see a considerable improvement in terms of playability. It's working as it should. And if we get a line here, we see lines do disappear. So no issue there. And let's just go ahead and hit R for restart, and it works just fine. Shapes move. And then if we hit the top, does it break? Yep, looks like it does break. So right off the bat, enabling low immediately got the game to work. So this is a big win. And if we look at total time spent, it's only added about 30 seconds overall to Qwen 3.8 27B. So right away, if you're building anything that requires a one-shot prompt, this low toggle alone is a huge win on its own. Let's take a look at medium. We see very similar results here with medium. Um, it functions, and it actually looks very close to what we see on low. Oddly enough, and we'll look at the numbers here shortly. Just want to make a line here to confirm that it does work if I can get there. Playing on the opposite side of my keyboard while I'm recording, so it's a little tricky. Yep, there we go. We saw the line disappear. Now let's go ahead and just fill it up and see if it breaks. Yep. And R works, shapes rotate, no issue. So this on medium, an interesting result here was that on medium, it actually did not do much thinking at all. And I thought this was an error. I thought this might be broken. But after learning about the preamble and how it's not really adding anything, and the actual thinking prompt that it generated was very little. So if we look at what happened in low, we get all this text that's being generated in order to kind of make the output happen. In medium, we get very little. Essentially a single HTML file, Tetris game, collision aware, lines, levels, new pieces, restart, keep it clean. So in this scenario, medium enablement allowed it to do minimal thinking and provide a really good output, which is why this is kind of the outlier. And on the overall averages, it brings the thinking percentage from kind of the expected 75% reasoning, 25% answer to be essentially a little more even. So that's kind of an outlier that I thought was really interesting. But that's kind of goes to show that like medium setting might be a very viable output for some people. Like I think if I generated this on medium, I'd be really, really happy because it did it faster than it did low, and obviously way faster than it did extra high. That being said, let's take a look at extra high and see how that looks. All right, so nice background. Let's see if enter works. It does. Ooh, we get some sound effects here. So this is nice. We get some shake and seems to be working just fine, but it's not rotating. Interesting. So are these pieces not rotating? Nope. Let me check if I can use a different key here. P works. That's nice. R works, but the pieces don't rotate. So does this look nicer? Definitely. But it's broken. So this one needs to obviously be worked on a little bit in order for it to be a final output. But it's really close. Pieces go away. We get some scores. We get some numbers popping up on the screen. Tetrafall is a nice fake name with some animations here. Does it actually end game? Yeah, end games. You get scores, you get lines, you get new best. Yeah, so this is like one or two response prompt back in order to fix the game, and you're good to go. So there was some feedback on yesterday's video that a fail one-shot prompt is not like a valid result. I think that's accurate, but it is a valid data set, right? Like we are giving it a one-shot prompt in order to see the capability of this model reasoning. And in this scenario, the output is really, really good. It just failed to complete a really important part of the game. Let me go ahead and inspect to see if there's any kind of errors in the console. Yeah, we have an error. So there's obviously something going on here that is breaking the game. And I'm sure it can be addressed fairly quickly if I spit that error back out and then we make it perfectly playable. But yeah, and we got rankings again. Again, this is all subjective. I think here, based off speed and based off quality, I think medium wins. Like medium beat high in this scenario. It's a little surprising, and I really like the token generation, and I really like the overall speed it took to generate this game. All right, so again, these ratings here are all subjective, and they're really for me to keep track so that when I kind of wrap up the video, I can talk about it. They are 100% not quantitative whatsoever. These are all on feel and vibes. In this scenario, medium is a valid winner here because it was able to generate something very good at 2 minutes and 58 seconds versus 52 minutes and 18 seconds. So saving a ton of time with a very good output. Now, if you wanted something more polished, would enabling high here make sense? Yes. And maybe a couple more prompts back and forth would have resolved this and you would have got a very shippable end result. However, we're doing benchmarks here on a single prompt because I can't spend all day optimizing for perfect game. And we can see that in the output, right? Low versus medium versus high. Look at all these all the text that was generated compared to low and medium. So that's very visible in terms of output. But yeah, let's jump on to the next one here. So we're doing eruption next. This is a volcano physics simulator. Here's the prompt. And we looked at this yesterday. This actually worked pretty well. We just had some issue with the magma rolling uphill, but overall this was not a bad result. And this kind of pushed me to kind of using Q4 in the first place. We can really get these particles up, which was pretty interesting. We were able to kind of fill up the screen. And the frames per second was working. My GPU kicked on and started kind of going a little crazy. But yeah, this was working fine. Now let's look at the thinking models here. So let's look at low, and we got a pressure meter here, and we actually have lava rolling down the hill, which is a win on its own. Can we bump this up here? Move the wind and particle amounts. We're at 3,000 particles. I asked it for 1,000 minimum, and we have a particle counter up here. Looks like it does get up to like 3,000, right? No button to actually launch the lava. Space doesn't really do anything, and enter doesn't do anything. But yeah, just the low effort enablement fixed the lava, and this is, I would say, passable. Let's move the wind to the left here and see if it shifts. Yeah, we see particles going to the left, and yeah, this is nice. This is good. How fast did it do it in? So with reasoning turned off, we have 6 minutes. With low, we have 11 minutes. So a slight bump in time, almost double, but we got a way more usable result. And again, you can kind of see the total number of outputs increased, as well as the percentage of time thinking is about 60% compared to so it's like double, right? Like half of the time was spent thinking, half the time was spent generating, and as a result, the output is significantly better than no reasoning at all. All right, let's look at medium. Volcano looks interesting. Can I hit enter or space or anything? Doesn't look like it, but lava's flowing downhill. We have particle counter. We have frames per second. Let's give it some more power, and let's put the wind at 5. No direction here. Actually, is it moving direction? Yeah, it's going left. The smoke is. And then let's go to the right. It takes a little bit to adjust. Let's bump up the particles. Let's do 3,000 and see what happens. That's a lot of particles here. Frames per second does not seem to be impacting. So either it's optimized or it's just not enough particles to do anything. But yeah, this is objectively better than low. Like if we look at them side by side, this does not look as good as this, even though some of these lines are kind of weird. The effects are nicer. The wind is nicer. Overall, better result, which is kind of expected. And then let's look at extra high. So we have a pressure counter. We have a button that also mapped to space to force eruption. I like that. Let's bump up the eruption power to see if it goes up higher. It's just more violent. It just spews a bunch of lava. As you can see, we have lava rolling downhill. The physics is working. Let's bump up the wind direction and see if that changes direction. Smoke is kind of leading to the right here. So we have some particles going to the right. Let's go all the way to the left and see if that changes and bump up the particle count. Yeah, we can see it's kind of leaning more towards the left. At least the smoke is. Not sure what the particles are. It's hard to count all of these, but it does look like it's doing something. Frames per second seems to be locked at 60. Again, either it's optimized or it's not working at all. It's hard to tell. Sure, I can look and inspect this, but this is a quick benchmark. But yeah, here overall, I think high wins in terms of quality. It took 52 versus 11.7. So once again, we get the scenario where the medium prompt thinking was actually much lower than low and high. So let's take a quick peek at that. This is the low thinking prompt. Yeah, that looks pretty lengthy. Medium, much shorter. And then high, tons of output. Still going. Yeah, it's a lot. So low, medium, high. I think the winner here, just based off vibes, I'm gonna have to give it to extra high just because it looks nice and it works. Would I mind running this in the background overnight for 42 minutes if the output was that usable? No, I would not mind. But it depends on the use case, right? If you need this to work ASAP and you value your time, then you might want to run it on medium as a kind of proof of concept and then kind of build on that instead of having to to really crank it up to extra high as it comes out of the box in default mode. But I think the results of extra high is valid and it looks real nice. So definitely, I think in this scenario, for this benchmark, it wins that result. Let's move on to the next one here. This is a essentially messy CSV file that has some data standardization and validation that has to be done. And then the goal is to provide an output that's kind of in a nice presentable format. We saw this yesterday. Let me close out some of these tabs. It generated a really good kind of presentation with all the right numbers. The only thing that was really broken here was the chart itself. But the numbers that it found and cleaned up were all valid, and no issue itself with the results except for this chart being broken. Let's take a look at low, which generated in about 3 minutes and 31 seconds, which was actually, no, sorry, 5 minutes and 5 seconds, which was actually faster than turning off thinking. So obviously low here is probably gonna do better. And it was technically faster. So let's see what it came up with. So a little more basic, not as nice in terms of like presentation. This looks more like your standard kind of software from a few years ago. Numbers 3283 is accurate. And then the number in terms of data quality, 31, 1, 3, and 27 are correct as well. And the chart works. So this was faster by a minute and it generated, I would say, a usable presentation. No issue there. It did the work. Let's take a look at medium before we kind of decide here. Same, very similar to low actually, and came up with the right numbers once again. A little bit different format presentation, a little more color here, but yeah, these two are technically pretty usable. I'm surprised that the non-thinking enabled model provided more output in terms of like presentation UI. And then finally, let's take a look at extra high. For it being extra high, I expected a little more, but you just got some highlighting, the right numbers, a working chart that says it's to scale. But honestly, if I could just fix this chart, enable thinking turn off wins. So I can't give it to it because it technically didn't complete the prompt correctly, right? Like 6 minutes and it got some things wrong. I'm sure I can fix it, but I think here low wins. I think low in this scenario is a perfectly passable, it's this one here, a perfectly passable chart for 5 minutes, and it did all the data cleanup, and the output's fine. So yeah, I'll give it to low in this one, and I'll just kind of quickly parse through the thinking once again. Low, pretty straightforward. Medium, pretty straightforward. And high is once again massive. So yeah, I think for this type of work, having it set to medium, low, or even off would probably be a good choice. So if I'm doing, which is what I normally do on my computer, kind of file processing, deduping stuff, processing MD files, I think medium, low, or even off is perfectly viable in this scenario. This is a nice little learning here. If we look at percentage of time spent in terms of thinking versus output, extra high is 80% versus 24, 31, or none. And tokens per second was minimally impacted by extra high. So yeah, I think low here wins, which is a nice surprise. And then finally, the blind artist, this is a SVG code with a dog wearing a yellow hat, driving a forklift, lifting server racks, and some stuff in the background. So just a fun little prompt here to see how it generates SVG files. We looked at a sneak peek yesterday and it was really, really good, but I didn't adjust the correct parameters. It was using the instruct off parameters. So I didn't want to share that exact same prompt in this video. So what I redid is ran the low, medium, and high effort with the correct parameters, and then comparing that to the instruct off. So this is the one from yesterday. It signed itself Qwen, which is one of the only ones that did in yesterday's benchmarking. And we said this was a perfectly passable kind of first attempt. Everything that we wanted, the dog with the hat, with the server rack, with the house and the sun, everything passes, right? This is completely okay in terms of no reasoning model. Now let's jump to low here. So right off the bat, we get one of those scenarios where low failed the test. And again, listening to the feedbacks and the comment section, you wanted to kind of see what this would actually look like if we just made a small like minor adjustment to get this to work. So I did do that. I went ahead and said fix what's broken. If we look at what's actually causing the issue, is just a small attribute change that needed to be applied. And when we did that, we get this image here. So we get a dog that's actually riding a forklift, and we get all the results. It actually looks, in my opinion, a little worse off than the instruct off, but it's again a passable model. It doesn't it signed its name once again incorrect, and it says Claude, and we can verify that in the output here shortly. But once again, technically low failed the one-shot prompt because it wasn't able to generate this in one attempt. But I just wanted to point out that we are really close to getting it to work. It just failed on one specific thing. And I'm sure if I rerun the same benchmark 4 or 5 times, one of those models will be, one of those results of those benchmarks will be passable, right? But this is kind of just showing that it's not spitting out complete garbage. It's spitting out things that are very, very close at low reasoning. In terms of time, 4 minutes versus 5 minutes. Let's take a look at medium here. Medium, we have a new player here. We have Gemini now being signed. And we have the house, we have the sun, we have the floor. Everything looks passable. Dog, neck, proper length, server rack, buttons. Looks great. Honestly, good job. Would I spend the extra, 60 seconds to get something like this? Yeah, for sure. This would definitely be a reasonable kind of wait time there. And then we jump to the 5x, which is the extra high version. And this is what looks really close to what I ended up previewing yesterday. The extra high default model was the setting that I enabled in the sneak peek. We get slightly different results here, but it still looks equally as great. We have a sun rotating, we have server racks with lights blinking, we have a dog, he's actually wagging his tail, we have some particle effects in terms of wind. This looks, I think, like the closest thing to a forklift we've seen in these images so far. We have a house in the background. It even kind of looks in a distance. It doesn't look like it was misplaced or it looks too front or back. It looks proper. We have some shadows, both for the server rack as well as the cart, and even some movement in the clouds. So the only thing it technically failed on was signing its own name. And again, a lot of you comment that it was most likely due to some of the AI training in the model. I do have to agree, because now that we've seen here in the medium that it signed itself Gemini, I'm thinking whatever Qwen is doing and Alibaba is doing to train their models in terms of SVG specifically, it's pulling different model names. And just to confirm that, if we look at the thinking results, look at low, I believe this one was Claude. So it says signature bottom right, Claude, small, I'll write my model name. I am Claude by Anthropic, and then so on and so on. So in the actual result of the thinking portion, it thought it was Claude. If we look at the next one, this was, I think, Gemini. Yep. It says signature text at the bottom right, Gemini, my old model name, use small font. If you look at the extra high one, which if you look, it's a lot of text. This one cited itself Claude. It says small text bottom right with model name, signed Claude. And then it goes back down here saying signed Claude, provide some details, and also ask Claude, question mark, just Claude, maybe a small label, spec, and so on. So yeah, it's clearly thinking it's a different model in terms of the backend stuff. So not too familiar with model training and all that stuff. A lot of you said that it was probably due to how it was trained in this specific task. And the more I'm seeing these results, the more I think it is accurate. So a nice little trip up there that we got to see live. Okay. In terms of ranking, once again, these results aren't quantitative and by any means, but if we take a look here, the only one that really passed was low. It was the only one that answered correctly, right, in terms of signing itself. Unfortunately, it did not pass the one-shot one. It only really worked whenever we fixed it by adjusting that attribute. Actually, no, I lied. Not low. Reasoning off got it correct. So reasoning off, I think here wins still. Passable art, SVG file working, and then actual model name correct. So I'm going to give it to reasoning turned off on this one. Uh, so what did we learn here? We have one vote for every reasoning effort. I don't know what to make of that. It seems like depending on your use case, toggling reasoning on and off is like a per user decision or per task decision. Hence why like Unsloth desktop UI having this toggle fairly easily accessible makes sense, right? If you're getting something that requires very quick data crunching like a CSV file or manipulating thing or generating something that's very minimal, low, medium, or none are perfectly reasonable. Not using the default of extra high seems like a smart approach. And unless you're specifically doing something that's very complicated that requires that level of extra high effort, or preserve thinking across the conversation, then you should probably run it medium. I'm gonna do a test for the next week or so, running Qwen 3.8 27B at its Q4 quantization at medium inside of my Hermes agent, as well as open code and things like that, and seeing how it performs at 20 tokens per second, roughly speed, at a Q4 at a medium. I'm perfectly fine waiting a little longer. And if anything, we learned medium in a lot of scenarios is actually faster than low and extra high, right? Extra high is obvious, but being faster than low is a nice little surprise there. So I think medium is the default choice for the time being. There is like a quick disclaimer from Qwen specifically that says setting it to low by default is kind of false. There's one thing to note. Here's a caveat straight from Qwen's model card. In multi-turn agentic task, lower reasoning effort does not always reduce overall task completion time. And we saw that, right? A lot of the lows get beat out by the mediums, and extra high just seems to always take longer and always produce objectively better quality. It's really good, right? Extra high default results are awesome. And that's why I think it's scoring so high on these benchmarking tests, because this model is very powerful and is doing great work. However, setting it to low, I think, is a fallacy, and it's directly from Qwen's model card. Although it may produce faster per turn response, it can also lead to insufficient analysis, more failures, and repeated retries, which may increase total latency and out in token consumption. And yeah, I saw that in a lot of my tests. Low ended up taking as much or even longer than medium, and the results were either very close or worse than medium's results. So yeah, it's lots of learning here. It's the more I dive into this world, the more I realize that I know nothing, and the more I think the harness matters in these scenarios. And I think that's my next move. I'm gonna test out different harnesses and plug in Q4 Onslaught Qwen 3.7 27B and see how it acts and how it performs in some kind of real work agentic tool calling tasks. Because I think that's where most people are going to use it, right? In their Hermes, in their open clause, in their Pi, and all these different things that they kind of use day to day, and seeing how that performs. So yeah, this is day 30. This is my last day of recording a video every day for YouTube. I'm going to continue this series, but not daily probably. I'm going to record this as I get some more details and information about AI and local AI and just overall topics that I'm curious about. And I'll continue the channel, just not at a daily rate, because it does become unfeasible at a certain point of trying to produce something every single day. But yeah, thank everyone for all the comments and feedback and all the subscribes. Go ahead and like the video if you enjoy the content, and tune in. Hopefully in the next few days, I'll put another video out. Thanks for joining.